Hello, my name is Charlie McGrath. I'm a Director of Objective Travel Safety. What I wanted to talk today was about the subject of data security. Firstly to say, I'm not a technician, I'm not a geek, I'm an ordinary computer user, I use a mobile telephone, and I occasionally go onto social media. But the subject of data security has become incredibly important for journalists and networks operating in the field. We've seen in the last particularly 5 years, an enormous growth on the use of data transmitted by technology. It's assessed that there are about half of all the telephones in the West are smart telephones, and that is rising dramatically in Southeast Asia and South America. I just read an article the other day in The Economist that by the year 2020, 27 billion items will be connected by the internet, from your washing machine to your car, talking to the manufacturers, reporting mistakes, etc. And therefore it's inevitable that we will rely much more on technology. Added to that is journalists love communicating. It's what they do for a living. And therefore the use of Twitter, the use of social media is burgeoning, and we see it a lot in the field. We have a lot of journalists following each other, following news stories. But that potentially can cause them and their networks, and indeed the people they are supposedly reporting and helping, a problem. With data security, you have to be careful that what you think is secure may not necessarily be secure. There are certainly a number of commercial companies that sell some very, very sophisticated equipment to regimes across the world that will pay for equipment. And even your smallest republic will probably spend a significant amount of its budget on its own security, and actually equipping its security forces with the technology to spy on insurgents or journalists is something they do. And there is growing evidence that equipment that we think is secure, Skype, text, Blackberries and things like that, they may not always be secure. And therefore we need to take precautions. But what we've also got to do, we've got to balance this, because there is, and I'll talk about it later, some apps and equipment and software that you can download onto your laptop or your iPhone. But of course, if you go into a state where they have a fairly sophisticated security apparatus and they spot that you're being quite clever, you're, as it were, raising a flag, you're raising your profile, then the security forces at the airport, etc., will become very interested in you very quickly. So we believe there is a balance. So firstly, I think it's always worth considering, if you're going on an assignment, what the threat is. And as a journalist, you will consider the physical threats. Are we worried about landmines, artillery, whatever the normal working in a hostile environment, but actually the threat to you with regards to your information. So therefore you do a sort of mini risk assessment to think, right, actually I'm working in a country, perhaps it has got good links to the likes of China, to Russia, and therefore I would expect that technology to be available. And we've seen that last year in Libya, we've seen it in the moment in Syria. Therefore thinking, right, what have I got that could be of use to those people? And actually, particularly, I've got to be extremely careful that at the end of my assignment, I will leave the country. But actually, if the security forces have been able to access my telephone, my laptop, my fixtures, my contacts may be exposed, and they will end up in prison or perhaps worse. So it's worth firstly considering what the threat is, discussing with those line managers, managing editors, head of news, what the situation is, talking to other people, and then perhaps seeing what you can do to lower your profile, particularly your digital profile. You may decide that actually there are certain laptops or telephones that you will wipe, and you will make sure they have very little information on them. You may consider actually perhaps taking a second telephone, maybe what's known as a burner telephone. Could be a sort of a standard Nokia with a local SIM card, and being very careful what you put on that SIM card. Do you need, and you might consider perhaps disguising some of the telephone numbers, adding a couple of digits to the end, or maybe just changing the numbers in a sequence that you can remember, so that if your telephone does fall into the wrong hands, you won't reveal your sources. Making simple things like making sure you've got passwords. We're all very I'm like anybody else guilty of it. We all go shopping on Amazon, etc. But if you have the same passwords, it makes it much easier for people to access your devices. You want a set of, particularly when it comes to bank accounts or your mobile you're taking your field, your laptop, changing the passwords, a mixture of numbers and uppercase, lowercase in terms of the alphabet. Making sure your telephone is locked and is unlocked by a password, because there is some, and we've done it, we've tried it, some very simple software you can buy on the internet, which you can get hold of a BlackBerry. It'll take a competent person probably 15, 20, no, maybe about a minute to load it onto that telephone, and then that will then transmit all the data from that telephone onto another source, a laptop, if you allow people to have access. So be careful about your devices, decide which ones you want to take in, change your numbers, check what information is on the laptop or the telephone. You may decide to have some form of very simple sort of code word when you're talking to each other on the telephone, in terms of locations could become numbers, and names of individuals, names of sources and fixers perhaps could be changed. Well, I'm not trying to turn you into 007, because of course if you walk in as 007 you'll be spotted immediately. But what we're trying to do is maybe just swim slightly lower than the rest of the people out there. So your profile is lower than some of the other maybe networks, NGOs, journalists, so that you don't be picked up. There is some quite sophisticated encryption devices that you can download, and there are a number available. You can quite a few telephones, quite a few Macs have vaults on them. But just be careful, because again, if you go into some countries, and bear in mind that some countries it is illegal to enter that country with encrypted material, the big boys, the US, the Israels, the Frances, the Russias, the Chinas of this world will spot that, and it won't be encrypted as far as they're concerned. So you could consider that, but maybe there are smarter ways of encrypting, in terms of encrypting by stealth, but not by actually sort of particular techniques. But if you want to maybe encrypt sort of iron key and various other devices that are available, maybe consider that. But we are a little bit, particularly as a company, concerned that people don't get too clever, because if you get too clever, you will raise your profile. And it's generally the simple things you can do: changing the passwords, changing names, changing telephone numbers, being very careful what you have on your laptops, your tablets, your mobiles before you go in. Maybe having a telephone that you know, in the event it might be a smart telephone, that you can hand over. It's got a little bit of information, no information for regards to the story, but you will then maybe hand that telephone in, or that'll get confiscated, and you can keep going with your cheap Nokia with a SIM card, and that's the way to operate. Thank you. If you'd like to find out more about the techniques and the advice I've spoken about, you might consider joining one of the Eurovision cybersecurity masterclasses, which will run occasionally, and they are very good. They're particularly designed for laymen in the field. They're not designed for technicians, and we will go through these various techniques.